Welcome to the FemiNinja Project, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Show. Today, I want to talk about breaking up. Because we've all had that experience of having to break up with someone, and it's always awkward and it's always uncomfortable. But a few years ago, I had the mother of all uncomfortable breakups when I had to break up with my BFF. Because how do you tell somebody that you have been best and dearest friends with for 30 years that you haven't liked them for the past 15, and you've been trying to figure out a way to break up with them for the past 10. Like I said, it was really, really awkward. But I just didn't have a choice, and I did do it. And it wasn't easy, I will admit that. But before I continue on to let you know how and why I broke up with my BFF, let me just give you a little bit of some background information about our friendship. And Mary Pat, and that's not her real name, she and I met in an adult beginning ballet class shortly after I graduated college and moved to Denver. And we established a very unlikely friendship because we could not have been more different from each other. As a matter of fact, we were exact polar opposites. Mary Pat was very quiet, shy, reserved, and highly intelligent. And then there was me, loquacious, demonstrative, outgoing, and just smart enough to get by. For some reason, we got along famously, but we did have a few common interests besides ballet and starting ballet late in life, which, at that point in your early 20s, that's really quite old to start your ballet training. But we both loved reading, books, and sewing. We both made our own clothes, or a lot of them. We loved antiques, and we would love to go antique shopping and out to lunch and dinner, sometimes after ballet class. And we really established a very close and affectionate relationship, even though, like I said, it was a very unlikely relationship. And for 15 years, we were inseparable. But then after about 15 years, something began to change. And what had once been a wonderful friendship that was based on mutual respect, support, and affection somehow began to deteriorate into one that was demanding, controlling, and manipulative. And it was a slow burn. It wasn't that it happened overnight, but I could just tell something was feeling a little bit uncomfortable between us, and I couldn't figure out what it was. But Mary Pat somehow had developed a bizarre superiority complex along the way, and she directed it toward every person she came across, even though she barely knew them. And her judgment and her arrogant condescension in the way she treated people was unbearable. But even worse, it started to filter into our small circle of friends, where even when we were at social gatherings, she would take that arrogant condescension and that criticism and direct it toward other people in public. It was just so uncomfortable to be around. It was just insufferable and intolerable. To give you an example, she was hosting a Christmas party one year, and we had got our marching orders to come early, and a mutual friend of ours did show up early for the party, and Mary Pat ripped into her so viciously that she was actually in tears. So before the guests got there, there was our friend sitting in the corner and crying. And I had talked to her later. I said, "Why did you do that?" And she says, "Well, I know better than her what she needs to do with her life, and I just don't approve of the way she's handling her situation at home with her mother being ill, etc." Wow, she didn't approve? And I think, as a true friend, our job is not to either approve or disapprove of what somebody is doing, but just to be a support system, to provide that sounding board, no matter what your friend or your acquaintance or stranger is going through. We all need to be treated with dignity, respect, and affection, especially when we're going through a rough time. Unfortunately, Mary Pat didn't see it that way unless she was the one that was going through the hard time. But there are other things that I noticed as well, different changes in her behavior. When we were in ballet class, as soon as I showed up, she would sidle up at the bar right next to me, so to speak, and manipulate the conversation. So I never even had the opportunity to speak to some of the other women or men around me, just to say hello, see what was going on in their lives and catch up. And even after class, again, she would wait in the dressing room and walk out to my car with me and stand there and talk until everybody else had gone, again, just not even giving me the chance to socialize with anybody else. And I really didn't think about it that much at the time, but then I finally, when I became aware of it, I realized that she was trying to isolate me from other people for some reason, and apparently it was working. And I remembered a few years earlier, one of our dance teachers had told me, in private, she told me that, when Mary Pat looks in the mirror, she sees you. And I just laughed at her and I just brushed it off. And she said, "No, I'm serious. She either wants to be you or she thinks she's you. And I just wanted to give you that little warning because it might save you some heartache in the future." And again, I just laughed it off. But maybe I should have paid more attention. And maybe even retrospectively speaking, I should have been more attentive when she began to turn more toward the dark side, toward the negative side. And maybe I could have helped her see the light, and maybe I could have changed things for her. But then maybe I'm just being arrogant myself, thinking that I would have that much influence over somebody. But I think that's another responsibility of being a good friend, is to be able to keep your friend from engaging in behavior that is unhealthy or destructive, or isn't serving them well. After all, what else are friends for if you can't talk them off the ledge every now and again? And as time progressed, Mary Pat became insufferable to be around. Our social interactions left me feeling drained, depleted, and even angry. And my face would ache from forcing a smile, a false smile, the entire time that we were together. And I would feel like I had been chewing on aluminum foil, which, imagine, to do that for a couple of hours when you're with somebody, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I tried to just pull back on some of our social engagements. But when I tried to limit our girl time, she became hostile and belligerent. I mean, oh my God. I couldn't imagine how she would react if I actually tried to break up with her. So I tried a different strategy, a different tactic. I really did want to salvage our relationship if I could, because after all, we had been friends for a very, very long time, and we had shared our deepest secrets. And we knew where all of the bodies were buried, just figuratively speaking, of course. So what I did was I tried to establish new patterns in our relationship by redirecting the conversation to more positive topics when we were together, and trying to set clear boundaries, and just to disregard the arrogant and condescending remarks and just not even respond to them. So I thought that was a pretty good way of dealing with the situation, and maybe turning her from the dark side into something that was a little bit more light and positive, and having the kind of friendship that we had had before, one that could be based more on mutual respect and admiration and affection. Well, it didn't go so well. She told me that she didn't approve of the way I was acting, and she didn't understand what was wrong with me. Oh, really? The truth was, I wasn't acting, and there was nothing wrong with me. And that's when I figured I was out of my league and I needed professional help. So I went to see a therapist. And on my first visit, when I walked in and he sat me down and he asked me what he could do for me. And I told him that I had a problem and I needed help. So he said, "What is your problem?" In that, soft, soothing, therapeutic voice that some of them have. And I just said, "Well, how do you tell somebody that you have been best and dearest friends with for the past 30 years, that you haven't liked them for the past 15, and you've been trying to figure out a way to break up with them for the past 10? He just looked at me and he kind of stammered a little bit. And finally he says, "Well, I don't think you can say it quite like that. And I just don't think that's a good way to handle it." And I said, "No, I agree. That's why I'm here. I need some help and I need some suggestions." So he said, "Well, just don't answer her phone calls. Just don't make arrangements to spend time with her, blah, 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 blah." And I said, "Well, you don't understand. It's a lot more complicated than that." And I gave him a little bit more background information about how much time how she was actually manipulating my time and insisting that we spend time together. And it was not only just the two of us, then we were doing things as a couple with my husband and her husband involved. And they had absolutely nothing in common. And as I said, it was just insufferable to be around them because they kind of would exacerbate each other's negativity. And he says, "Well, just don't make any social engagements." And I said, "Well, plus I do have to see her in ballet class a couple of times a week." And he said, "You know what? You're right. You do have a problem." And he really didn't have any great suggestions for me, but for some reason I did feel better because at least I felt like I was validated. My feelings were validated and I really kind of did have this big problem. So I just developed another strategy. My next plan of attack or my next plan of action was to pull back even more and just ignore her outbursts and her belligerent behavior and her hostile reactions when I would not make plans with her. I changed my dance schedule and I started going to different classes and to different studios so I wouldn't even have to run into her. And on the rare occasion when I did see her in class, I would just give her a big smile and I would wave to her from across the room, and I would leave class early so there was no chance for her to corner me after class before I got into my car. And it seemed to be working pretty well, although I did notice that the more I was pulling back, the more she was trying to clutch to me. I mean, it was pretty obvious that we didn't have the kind of friendship that we had before, but I didn't want to completely break up with her because just for old time's sake, when you've been that close with somebody for so long, you really do have a certain amount of love and affection for them, even if you do want to take a baseball bat to their head every now and again. But I thought maybe, if I did pull back for a while, that we could kind of hit the refresh button or the reset button and maybe start over again after we gave ourselves a little bit of time off from each other. And in my own personal opinion, my own head, it seemed to be working pretty well until one day she actually showed up at the dojo and told me she decided to start studying martial arts with me. I was horrified and I simply didn't know what to do. And she told me, she says, I've seen how much it's done for you and how confident you are, and I want you to help teach me, too, the art of the ninja. Well, now by this time, I had been at the dojo for, probably at least 6 years. I was more than halfway to my black belt. I was an instructor, a student instructor. So my responsibilities as a more experienced and advanced student was to teach the new students, the white belts and the lower belts who came into the dojo. So there I was in my safe place, my sanctuary of solitude, the one thing and the one place that I had that was mine and mine alone, this relationship that I had established with the other students, with my sensei, with everybody in the school. And here comes Mary Pat. And there was nothing I could really do about it. So I spent the entire class, showing her the basics and teaching her and some of the other lower belts. And the whole time in the back of my head was like, oh my God, what am I going to do about this? And what am I going to do? I can't not train any longer. I can't find another dojo the way I could find another ballet school. And the entire way home after class, I kept thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? And then I convinced myself by the time I pulled into my driveway that I didn't need to worry about it. She wasn't going to like martial arts, and this wasn't really a venue that she would enjoy, and I wouldn't have to worry about it. So this was probably just a one-time thing. And as soon as I walked in the door, my phone rang, and it was her just bubbling about how wonderful it was and how much fun she had and how much she enjoyed the class. And she talked to Sensei afterwards, and she signed up and registered for a couple of months of classes. And she just wanted to thank me for rescuing her from one of the other upper belts who was training her because she didn't like them. And then she told me that she was going to explain to Sensei that there were only certain people that she was going to work with, and they had to be either a brown belt or over, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm listening to this, and I said, Mary Pat, it doesn't work quite like that. And she says, you don't understand. This is what I want, and I'm going to get what I want. Well, yeah, she usually did. And it's really funny. I actually had one of my sisters, when I told her what happened, she says, well, you know what you're going to have to do? And I said, what, quit? And she says, no, you're going to have to just break her arm. And I bust out laughing. I says, I can't do that. And she says, yes, you can, and you could make it look like an accident. And I said, no, there's no way that's going to happen. I said, I have a better idea. I think I need professional help again. So I went back to the therapist, and he says, well, what are you doing here? And did you take care of your problem? And I said, no, it just went from bad to worse. So I told him that Mary Pat was now at the dojo and so excited about taking classes and training with me. And he said, well, I don't think you should worry about it, that, she'll probably lose interest right away. And it just might just take a few classes. And I said, no, she's already paid for several months of classes. And he says, well, maybe she's got that kind of personality that she really doesn't stick with things very much. And it's like, no, it's been 30 years and she's still taking ballet class. So we discussed it a little bit longer. And finally he said, you know what? You do have a problem. Once again, I felt validated that I wasn't over-exaggerating. I did have a problem, and that I was going to be stuck with this woman forever, and maybe I was going to have to take care of her for her entire life, because our relationship had also deteriorated to a point where both she and her husband would call me for medical advice. Anytime they had something wrong, they would call me to find out what Miss Cheryl had to say about it and what they were supposed to do. Well, I'm a physical therapist. I'm not a physician. And I would just refer them, have you called your physician? Have you done this or done that? And it's like, why am I doing this? Why? It was just driving me crazy. But then something truly remarkable happened. After about 3 weeks of training at the dojo, I got a phone call from her, and she told me that she had fallen on the ice that morning when she was walking the dog, and now she can't move her wrist, and she wanted to know what to do about it. So I said, well, could you have broken it? And she says, I don't know. I can't move it. And I said, did you call the doctor? Well, no. Do you have are you going to get an x-ray? Well, no. And I said, well, then why are you calling me? And she says, well, I thought you could tell me what to do. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is so bizarre, because you're a highly intelligent, really highly educated person, and you don't even know enough that when you can't move your arm, when you've fallen on the ice, that there might be something wrong with it. So I did manage to convince her to go to the doctor and get an x-ray, and her arm was broken. And I'm here to tell you, I was nowhere in a 10-mile radius. I didn't do it. But the first thing after I hung up was call my sister and say, you are not going to believe this. Her response was, well, I told you it was going to work out. And at that point, I figured, okay, I won't have to worry about her showing up at the dojo any longer. And this is one more step in just snipping the ties that she had to me. Well, of course, she would ask me my opinion once the cast came off, and, asking for advice and what to do. And she was very upset because the doctors told her not to go back to ballet class until, after the cast came off, and that they knew it was healed properly and stuff. And I had told her a couple of things about how to rehab it, and apparently it wasn't the right thing that she wanted to hear, and got very upset. And so finally I just, said, I'm done. And I just walked away and said, figure it out for yourself. She didn't look very happy, but I didn't care. A few weeks later, I was shopping at Target, and I had a full cart. And as I rounded the corner, I heard somebody coming from the opposite direction, because I heard a loud clicking of heels against the floor. And as I was pushing my cart to round the corner, there was Mary Pat walking down the aisle holding a little basket of groceries. And I almost T-boned her with my cart, which is kind of funny. And as soon as I saw her, my face lit up and I smiled and I said, hi. She looked at me, stuck her nose in the air, and just tossed her head and kept on walking by without saying a word. It was a little bit strange, and I stood there for a moment thinking, that was really weird. And all of a sudden, I felt like a 50-pound weight had just been removed from the top of my head. And I just floated the rest of the way through Target and the rest of the way home. And I realized I had finally solved my problem. There was a part of me that was very sad to have had to say goodbye to a friendship like that. And I have to admit, even at this late date, I do miss that kind of intimacy to a certain degree, but I certainly don't miss the stuff that went along with it. And I realized that how much that she was chipping away at my dignity and my personal power over the previous 15 years. And I was allowing her to do it. I don't know why, but maybe it was just because the friendship had become a habit and a pattern that we were both kind of clinging to, her more than me. After that day in Target, I wondered for a while, when did things go so wrong, and when was it that she had begun to change? But then I had another thought. Maybe I was the one who was changing. Maybe after studying martial arts, my sense of awareness and the way I would relate to people and relate to the environment even was different than it was beforehand. That newfound sense of awareness, that sense of confidence, strength, and self could have been actually the beginning of the end for our relationship, because what I was willing to put up with prior to beginning to study martial arts was a lot different once I began training. And I think that's one of the many unexpected benefits of doing something like a martial arts, something that really gives you that deep sense of confidence that comes from a place that is so deep within you, and that sense of self-respect that goes along with it. And I also realized along the way that Mary Pat was not treating me with respect, the kind of respect and dignity that I deserved, the kind that everybody deserves. And it's also interesting to reflect that toward the end, what I was doing with Mary Pat was I was practicing a technique that I had learned in martial arts, and it's part of it I shared with you. It's a very super secret or super sneaky ninja secret that just step out of the way. When somebody is attacking you, what you need to do is just evade, get out of the way. The entire little ninja secret is evade, deflect, and redirect, which is what I did with Mary Pat toward the very end to try and terminate our relationship. Evade, I would just avoid her, get out of the way, so I wasn't even there. I would just disappear like a ninja. It works quite well. You can practice this technique. And then the other part was to deflect, put her attention somewhere else. I like to laugh and say it's almost like that scene in Star Wars, the original one. Oh no, those aren't the droids you're looking for. Or going back in time even more, the Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. You're kind of clearing the area for yourself. And then redirect. Oh, look, a bird. Oh, hey, go look over there. There's something else I think that you should pay attention to, and not me. So that's kind of looking at it in kind of a broad way, but it's so funny how those skills that I learned on the mat can be applied to every single life experience. And one of the other things that I learned in martial arts, something I always had, was a very strong sense of respect for other people. But I didn't have that much of a sense of respect for myself. And that's kind of embarrassing for me to admit to that, but it's true. And after years of training and paying respects to my fellow students, to my teachers, my senseis, to the kamidana at the beginning and the end of every class, you really understand that deep sense of, I deserve that amount of respect too, and I will not stand for anything less than that. The kind of dignity and respect that I deserve. And it's interesting that when you don't get that from any kind of a relationship, how it really chips away at your power, your sense of power and strength. And that's basically what was happening to me in that friendship with Mary Pat, is that every time I allowed her to disrespect me, it would just slowly chip away at my own personal empowerment and my own sense of self and my confidence. So my final thoughts in regard to this kind of crazy story, which has a lot of life's lessons in it, is that sometimes we have to end a relationship for our own mental, emotional, and even physical well-being. Toward the end of my friendship with Mary Pat, I was having incapacitating headaches and neck pain. But you know what? That disappeared when that 50-pound weight came off of my head that day in Target when I almost T-boned her with my cart. And she just, tossed her head, ignored me, and kept walking on. It was like, wow, okay, I feel a whole lot better now. But what's even more amazing is after I gave my permission to listen to that inner voice inside of me that said, this isn't working for you and you're not going to be a happy person until you do something about this relationship, all of a sudden, not only was I a happier person, but I had so many more friends. Just eliminating that one friendship in my life opened up the doors to a tremendous amount of positive energy, wonderful people who came into my life that I am so grateful for to this day. So just because you have something in common with somebody doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get along or be BFFs forever. If somebody isn't treating you with the dignity and the respect that you deserve, sometimes you just have to evade, deflect, and redirect. You deserve to be treated with dignity and respect by everybody that you come in contact with. But before you give up completely on a relationship that you might want to salvage, try going positive and redirecting the conversation and the direction of the things that you do talk about. Again, evade, deflect, and redirect. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And the other important thing to remember is that sometimes we need to ask for help, either professional help or help from other people who might be able to help us with a difficult situation. The other thing is that once I realized that Mary Pat was not my responsibility, all of a sudden I was able to just let it go, because not everybody is our responsibility. We have a responsibility to ourselves and to be able to take care of ourselves. And that brings me to another little memory just popped up into my head right now, is that I remember at one point, and this was actually shortly after I had been assaulted, and which of course is something that she denied and was certainly not very supportive or helpful during that time. And she told me once that all I ever did was complain. Me, Little Miss Sunshine, that's all I ever did was complain. I was horrified and I just stared at her, and she said, other people have real problems and you have to listen to them. Before I even had a chance to respond, she looked at me and she says, you have responsibilities to me. I couldn't imagine ever saying that to somebody else. I don't even think I've ever said that to my husband. I'm responsible for myself. So that was just kind of like a little interesting aside there that I just had to share with you. But personal relationships, our friendships, really define who we are as a person. It helps us determine our belief systems, how we interact not only with that person, but with other people. And when it's negative and so much effort just to even have a conversation with them, listen to your gut. That's a really good sign that maybe it's just time to cut that person loose. So our own health and well-being is more important than somebody else's, especially if they're the one who's sucking the life out of us. There are so many positive, wonderful benefits to healthy relationships, which include, just having somebody to be able to hold our hand during the tough times, celebrate our accomplishments, and vice versa. Just somebody to connect with. It gives us a sense of belonging and having that support system. And a good friendship is a wonderful thing to have. And I truly believe that there is nothing better than the gift of friendship. And it's something that you're extending to another person, and in return, they are extending theirs back to you. because the consequences of a toxic relationship is just too unbearable to have to deal with. And any relationship can turn toxic at any time. So it's something to always be aware of and to enjoy and celebrate the people that you choose to spend time with. And every now and again, it's almost like pruning a tree or, deadheading a flower bed. Sometimes you have to get rid of the stuff that is just sucking the life out of your garden so you can let new life and new positive energy back into your life. So those are just my thoughts for today about relationships. And sometimes you have to break up with someone. No matter how awkward and painful it is, it's going to make you a lot happier in the long run. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.